Hello, Alyosha Society friends. In this brief video, I want to address the issue of how to enjoy a book, how to enjoy a novel specifically. You know, you're in the Alyosha Society. You're a member of the Alyosha Society, which means you love books. You're a bibliophile. But sometimes, we can reach a point that we kind of lose that enjoyment. You know, we make ourselves read books sometimes that we know are important and books we should read, and I think that's a good thing to do. And then, you know, sometimes we just read a book and it just doesn't jive with us. So how can we stay fresh in this area? How can we enjoy what we're reading? And that's what I want to address. I've just got some thoughts and some practical ideas on how to enjoy a novel. Let me begin with this, though. A wise man once said that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, and if you teach a man how to fish, then he's going to be eating a lot longer than that. And as I've mentioned before, I'm more interested in focusing on how to do the fishing, and in this case, how to read and how to enjoy what you're reading, rather than simply just focusing on the content of the one book we happen to be reading at that time. So what are the things that we should look for in every book we read to maintain that freshness and that enjoyment of reading? First of all, I want you to think about this question. What is the number one impediment to enjoying a book? Think about that for a second. If you want to pause the video and think about it, what is the number one impediment to enjoying a book? All right, I'm going to share what I believe is the number one impediment to enjoying a book. In order to enjoy a novel, you have to understand it. I believe that the number one impediment to enjoyment is lack of understanding. We get bogged down in a book, we get lost, we lose track of what's going on, whatever the case may be. We're not understanding what we're reading, and the enjoyment of it goes out the window. So we're going to address that. How do I then better understand what I'm reading so that I can enjoy it more? All right, I'm going to go over three areas. First of all, seeing it in its context. I'm going to elaborate on that. Second of all, how do I better track with the story? You know, sometimes we just kind of lose track of what's happening in the plot. And the understanding goes, thus goes the enjoyment. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about picking up on literary devices. What are literary devices, and how can knowing a little bit about them enhance my understanding of a book and thus my enjoyment of it? So let's look at these three areas. Number one, context. Number one, context. I think it's really important when you're reading a book to get to know the author. I mean, the book is a product of a particular man or woman. And knowing as much as you can about that person's life, background, family, interests, and so forth, goals, desires, worldview, can really enhance your understanding of the book. And you're then going to interpret what you're reading through the grid of that understanding. The book wasn't written by some random non-person. It was written by an individual who has opinions, who has likes, who has dislikes. Find out as much as you can about the author of a book in order to understand it better and thus enjoy it more. When was it written? Why did he or she write this book? What prompted the author to write it? What was going on around him? What was going on in that person's family? What was happening in politics? What was happening in culture? All of those things are really going to color the way the author thinks and thus what the author is trying to express. You know, find out as much as you can about the historical context in which that book was written. It'll enhance your understanding. It'll improve your enjoyment of the book. Number two, I want to talk a little bit about tracking with the story. I know this is a big problem for me. I get very bogged down and quite honestly often lost in novels that have complicated plots. It's just the way it is. I don't track very well with them. As you read a novel, especially longer ones, it can definitely be easy to lose track of the story and the characters. So I want to talk a little bit about some things that have helped me keep up with the storyline and the characters and not lose a sense of what's going on. Again, when that goes, enjoyment goes. So a couple of ideas here. Now, coming from a literature teacher, you guys are going to think this is sort of like the unpardonable sin, but I'm gonna stand by it. Spark Notes is not inherently evil. There it is. I said it. I put it out there. Or Cliff's Notes. Some of you may be more familiar with Cliff Notes. Look, if you're in the middle of a novel and you think that you've kind of lost track of what's going on, you just need to look up a chapter summary and get caught up with what's going on in the plot. Don't torture yourself by continuing to plow through. Now, it's one thing if the author hasn't revealed certain things that are going to be happening like that. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about you feel like some things have fallen through the cracks in your reading comprehension. Just look up a summary of the chapters that you have supposedly read up to that point. And every once in a while, just look up a chapter summary to make sure that you are tracking with the story. Don't torture yourself by just plowing through with it. Also, some versions will put a character list at the beginning. I do like the books that do that. But if they don't, you may want to create one. I tend to write them in the back of the book. As I come across certain characters, then I'll sort of write them down. Like, you know, this guy's the father, this guy's the mother, or this woman's the mother, sorry. Here's this, oh, this is a cousin. Just sometimes I lose track. I make family trees often in the backs of my books. My books are filled with the inside back covers having family trees on them. Another thing I do, I call the bookmark trick, is I'll use a bookmark that is something I can write on, you know, like a long sheet of paper or whatever. And I'll put notes on the bookmark. You see, a lot of times we don't want to do these extra things because we just want to read and we don't want to be interrupted and we don't want to have to turn to the back or turn here or go there or get online and look something up. Yeah, I understand. You just want to curl up with a good book. Well, write some of these things down on a bookmark. Sometimes putting a character list on the bookmark, and then the bookmark's right there. It's always right there. And you have those notes or you have that character list and you can just refer right to it. This is especially true in some of the Russian novels. The Russian novels just fill, and some Dickens novels as well, just have so many characters it's hard to keep up with them. And especially in Russian literature, they don't always use the same name for one particular individual. Sometimes one individual can have 3 or 4 different names. You know, nicknames, formal names, informal names, whatever the case may be. Try the bookmark trick. Maybe it'll be helpful for you. And again, I'm just throwing out suggestions here. If it doesn't work, then, you know, chuck it. Well, I do want to encourage you to try this just for fun. Just give it a whirl. Listen to at least a chapter of a book that you're reading on audio. Just see how you like it. You may hate it. It may not be a way that is helpful for you. But have the book in your hand and be looking at the book while you're listening to it. Put the book down a little bit, listen to it without the book, back and forth. See what works for you. See what's helpful for you. Again, may not be helpful, but you may find out that some books, you can just pick up the action a little bit better if you do it on audio. All right, number 3. So seeing it in context, tracking with the story. Now we come to number 3, literary devices. What are literary devices? Well, gifted authors make novels more enjoyable by using their skills to create a beautiful work of art. Rembrandt paints a painting. Charles Dickens writes a novel. They're both works of art. What does that entail? Well, a part of that art involves enhancing the story with what we call literary devices. What are literary devices? Well, we can divide literary devices into two categories: literary elements and literary techniques. Let's take a look at some examples of these. Literary elements. First of all, there is probably what you learned in 9th or 10th or 11th grade English class, the 5 elements of a plot. Just a basic plot line generally has these 5 elements. Why is it good to know these? Well, when you're tracking with the story, it's kind of good to know where you are on the roller coaster. It's kind of good to know where you are on the journey so you don't get lost. There's usually, most good novels have an introduction, get to know the characters. You know, Jane Austen does this at the beginning of her novels. Then there's some sort of rising action. There's usually some kind of dilemma or problem that's presented. And then the novel will reach a climactic moment where something transformative or something really comes to a head, a climactic moment. And then after the climactic moment, again, it's just like a roller coaster. After the climactic moment, there will be falling action. And then finally, at the end, what we call the resolution. Everything. Again, Jane Austen novels are really good. This novel that I have an image of on the board is a very good one and an easy one to follow, Crime and Punishment. So knowing what the 5 elements of a basic plot are can kind of help you look for them and think through that as you're reading. The setting of a story. When is it going on? Okay, just because the author lived at a certain time doesn't mean the story is going on during that time. So when is it happening? And what was the world like? What was that country? Is it 19th century France? Is it 20th century England? Is it modern America? What is it? Where and who? That's going to impact. These literary elements are going to really impact how you understand it. Understanding terms like protagonist and antagonist. Who's the protagonist of the story? The protagonist, that's just another word for the main character, the hero of the story. The antagonist, some sort of villain maybe, someone who represents a foil or the opposite of what the protagonist is all about or trying to accomplish, the antagonist. Think about the narration of the story, because there's a lot of variety here. I like first-person singular narration. It's a little bit rare. David Copperfield is a great example of this. So he's telling the story from his own perspective. So I did this, this happened to me. But a lot of stories have what we call third person omniscient narration. That is, there's a just generic third person author who you assume that this person knows what people are thinking, and you have to know that. So, think about what style of narration is being used in this book and how that will impact your understanding of the novel. Next, conflict. What are the values of the different characters in the story, and how do they clash? How does the author set things like the mood? Those are really important. And I had theme on the board there, and I want to dwell on that a little bit more here in just a second. But I look at these literary devices as sort of like Easter eggs. We hide the Easter eggs at Easter, and we have our children go and find them. Well, good authors will put these little gems, these little devices here and there, and these little elements here and there in the story. And it's kind of fun to know what some of them are, so that then you can go find them. I mean, if you didn't know what an Easter egg looks like, then you wouldn't know one if you found one, would you? You have to know what an Easter egg looks like before you can go out and find one and get one and say, look, I found this Easter egg. Same is true of literary devices. So let's talk about a few of these. Imagery. How does the author paint pictures for you? How does the author use similes and metaphors? Think through those, watch for them. How is the author, Dickens does this a lot, using hyperbole. A lot of times people read Dickens and they don't understand that he's just trying to be funny and he's exaggerating things to the point of ridiculousness. Well, if you don't know he's doing that, then it just seems odd to you. Is a particular part of this story, or maybe the entire story, allegorical? Well, that's going to impact how you interpret and understand the story, isn't it? Which, once again, remember, understanding leads to more enjoyment. So it's good to know these things. Yeah, again, is an author being ironic? Now, I want to dwell more specifically on these bottom three here: symbols, motifs, and themes. These are the three I really want to dwell on. What are they? Well, motif and theme in a novel are linked. Okay, a motif is a recurring image or idea or symbol that will kind of develop the theme. And I think generally speaking, we don't want to look at a novel as having 20 themes, but rather probably one or two, but the theme is the central idea or message of the book. That's the theme. So we're not looking for many themes, really. We're looking for one theme. So let's look, what are these? Symbols, motifs, and themes. So a symbol. A symbol is anything that represents another thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be recurring. Okay, it could be a tree. It could be a cup. It could be a ring. It could be any kind, it could be a bell. It could be any kind of object, but that object is representing some other idea, some other universal concept. Now, we'll look at an example here in a minute. What's a motif? Well, look, a motif is a symbol that's repeated. When we read Crime and Punishment, we talk about bells. We talk about bridges also. They are recurring motif in Crime and Punishment. Fyodor Dostoevsky is doing something very unique with bells. He's using them to communicate a message, and they show up over and over and over and over. So a bell is a symbol, but bells actually end up becoming a motif in Crime and Punishment. Well, it's good to know, why is he doing that? And what is it that he's trying to point to with these bells and with these bridges? And then finally, theme. Again, a theme is the central idea or message of the novel. Now, here's the way I like to picture it. I want to use A Tale of Two Cities as an example. Okay, just come up with a book that maybe you're familiar with. In A Tale of Two Cities, some common symbols might be a broken wine cask. At the beginning of the story, this red wine spills out into the streets. It becomes very obvious that that is a symbol and a foreshadowing for blood that is going to be spilled in the streets of Paris. Knitting to represent fate is another symbol that's used in A Tale of Two Cities. Now, again, the broken wine cask only occurs one time, so it's a symbol. The knitting shows up over and over and over, so it's a symbol that becomes a motif. What are some common motifs in A Tale of Two Cities? Well, I think knitting could be one of them. Another one would be doubles. All kinds of different doubles, and that is anything, any two things that sort of look alike. I'm not going to talk about that a whole lot because that gives away the amazing ending to the story. But doubles, different doubles, and also many resurrections. In other words, different kinds of ways that something could be gone or dead or missing, but it comes back to life or it comes back into existence in some way. Dickens plays with this in many different ways in the story to build towards the big theme, the central idea, which is resurrection. Again, I don't want to say a whole lot more about it. I don't want to give away the beautiful ending of A Tale of Two Cities if that's a book you're still going to be reading. But do you see how it builds? I see them as sort of building like this. We have these symbols that pop up throughout the story. If they are recurring symbols, then they are motifs. And then these motifs are going to be coming together to give us many different angles and different ways of seeing the one single solitary central idea of the story. So in this case, it all builds beautifully towards this concept of new life or resurrection. Now, if you read through A Tale of Two Cities or reread through A Tale of Two Cities, you'll see this. And you'll see many more than I've pointed out here. You'll see lots of other symbols and you'll see other motifs. I'm just using a few as an example. So think about some of these well-known novels that you've probably read, Les Mis and Pride and Prejudice and Oliver Twist and The Great Gatsby. And think to yourself, okay, interesting. What are some of the symbols in these stories? What are some of the motifs, recurring symbols in these stories? And what do you think might be an overarching theme? And how does the author build to enhance and highlight that message that he or she is trying to communicate? All right, I want to throw out some bonus material for you. This is just extra. All right, no extra charge for this. If you struggle with reading comprehension, then I want to encourage you to read smaller increments. You know what? Even if it's just 5 pages a day, you can't really skim a novel. There's some kinds of books that you can skim, maybe textbooks, but you can't skim a novel. So just try to bite off smaller increments. Just see if that helps. You know, I'm just trying to throw out whatever I can here to help you improve and increase in your understanding of a book so that you enjoy it more. That's the whole idea. Secondly, imagine the story in your mind. You know, let your imagination go. Get all 5 senses into the action. You know, try to ask yourself questions like, in this particular scene I'm reading, okay, maybe it's 19th century London, maybe it's mid-19th century Russia, whatever the setting of the story. Maybe it's, you know, mid-20th century France, whatever. Ask yourself, how does it feel? What is the weather like? What would I be smelling if I were on this particular street or in this particular house? What's cooking? What would I see? How would things taste? Get all 5 senses and put them to work in getting your imagination and placing yourself in the middle of this story. Don't be passive. Don't be passive when you read. Be active. Process the plot and engage your mind by asking questions like, I wonder what this person's thinking right now. And why in the world did he just say that? Sometimes I have conversations with the characters. You know, my family members think I'm completely bonkers, which is probably true. But I have conversations. Why did you do that? You know that that's going to make her upset. Whatever the case may be. I write in the margins, you know, have conversations with the author. I think if you do that, you'll get in the middle of the story a lot more. Another thing that I think is helpful, make predictions about the outcome. You know, ask yourself, how do I think this is going to unfold? And then see if you're right. Yeah, it's just kind of fun to do that. It gets you more engaged in the story as well. Talk to yourself out loud, you know, again, at the risk of appearing completely bonkers. Well, I hope that these tips have been helpful. Again, remember, increasing understanding will increase enjoyment. And if you're seeing the book in context, if you're tracking with the story, and if you have some knowledge of literary devices and what to look for, those Easter eggs, I think those three things can really enhance your understanding of what's going on in this book, and thus hopefully cause you to enjoy it a lot more. Thank you for indulging me, friends.